Hi, everybody, it's Lee Caraher, and this is Everything Speaks, where we talk about how everything you do and say speaks for you if you want it to or not. Today, we're going to talk about people who just say, get to the point, and how when you just get to the point, you actually don't just get to the point. It's the worst advice you could give or take, and it really doesn't mean what it says it means. That makes sense. So everybody says it, right? People are rambling, and I just get to the point. Tell me what's going on, right? People say, cut to the chase, or don't bury the lead, or, just get to the point, or whatever it is. And frankly, taking this advice is often, particularly in the workplace, is killing your impact, right? The bottom line without context is like a punchline without a joke. It just falls flat. It doesn't allow you to give the import of the actual bottom line. So that doesn't mean that we should be rambling and not having an arc and getting to a point, like telling a story that has a punchline, that has a delivery, that has a point, right? But when people say get to the point, they don't actually want speed. They want clarity. So you do need to practice how to get to that clarity, but let's just talk about what that means, right? So when people say get to the point, they don't want speed. They want the clarity of what you're trying to tell them, right? What they're actually saying is, I'm confused. You've lost me in the details. I don't see why this matters. 99% of the time, that's what they're saying. And the fix to that is not a faster delivery. It's a better structure in how you're setting up your information. Okay. So let's talk about why context beats speed in getting to the point, right? So imagine that you're presenting, you've had a kick-ass Q2 and you just lead with the punchline. We grew revenue by 12% in Q2. That has no context. Were you supposed to do that? Were you supposed to double that? Where you have huge headwinds going into Q2, you need to wrap the context around that we grew revenue by 12% in Q2. Because without it, I don't know if that's good, bad, or indifferent, right? So what if you said, when we entered Q2, we were facing a 15% drop in demand, but we did 2 targeted campaigns, and one of them worked really well, and one of them didn't work as well. But in the end, we grew revenue by 12%. We had a lot to learn, which we're going to apply to Q3. What if you did that? Same number, completely different impact. Completely different impact. Why? Because the second had tension, like the situation we were entered into Q2, we were facing a 15% downturn. The context of all those things going on and the payoff. You did these 2 campaigns and it paid off with a 12% growth in a 15% down market. Boom, right? Boom. When you have that data, the data is important, right? The data proves the point, right? But the data doesn't tell the story. And Nancy Duarte, who I love, and if I had my book behind me, I would pull it out and show it to you. But her book, Resonate, if you don't know who Nancy Duarte is, go on over to Duarte Communications. I think it's Duarte.com. I'll have the link in here. And she actually did the PowerPoint for Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth. So basically, she won an Oscar for a PowerPoint. And she really changed the whole way that presentations were constructed in the 90s and the aughts. I mean, a huge impact on how, particularly in Silicon Valley, how people gave presentations. And what people do for presentations today has so much to do with how she saw things and how she figured out how to bring stories to life. And she always says, data needs story to be understood. Story needs data to be believed, right? So if you just tell me 12%, like I said, the 12% growth, good, it's bad, it's indifferent. And then in the story could be, we did 2 campaigns and we were facing all this thing and da-da-da-da. So you tell this story, like, oh my gosh, and then there was this and there was that. And on Tuesday we did another campaign and it didn't work, but the campaign on Thursday worked and da-da. But if you don't have the bottom line, the punchline, and we grew revenue by 12%, it doesn't matter. The story without the data doesn't matter. And the data without the context, the story doesn't matter. You got to marry those two. And when you marry those two, people aren't going to tell you get to the point. They're not, because they're getting to the point. So basically, your point is worthless without the setup that makes people care. I say that again, because repetition helps. Your point is worthless without the setup or context that makes people care about your point. So let's talk about 3 ways to fix that so that you're giving the context and the data so that people care. And you're telling the point so that it's relevant, impactful, and tells a story of how you're going to move forward. So number 1, hook before headlines. In the same example, let's talk about Q2 results, right? How about the hook. We ran 2 campaigns in Q2. One flopped, one crushed it. Here's why. Tell me more. Let's talk about Q2 campaign results. We ran 2 campaigns in Q2. One flopped, one crushed it. Here's why. I want to listen to that. Number 2, the so what test. For every stat or story, ask why should they care right now? So in media relations and press relations, we always ask the question, what would make people write, W-R-I-T-E, right now? What would make people write right now? And if you can't make people right now, it's not news, it's evergreen content. It's interesting. It's a feature. But news is something that you have to write right now before it gets stale. So if you can't think about for every stat or story, why should you care right now? Even if I like the story, well, Thursday, oh my God, we had lunch and then I got a phone call. We had a campaign was supposed to start, but we couldn't push go. And, that's cocktail hour story. That is not business story. Business story is 2 campaigns in Q2. One ran on Tuesday, one ran on Thursday. The Thursday one crushed it. The Tuesday one didn't. We adjusted and moved forward. Maybe if I'm a cocktail, I give you all the drama. And then Joe went to lunch and he forgot to push go and da-da-da-da. Right? That's not what we're talking about. Right? So for every stat or story, you're going to ask the question, what do they care about right now? If you can't answer that question or why someone else would care about that story or that stat, don't say it. Edit yourself. Realize where you're going to put that story at the cocktail party, at the bar versus in the business conversation or the press release or whatever it is. Number 3, build the bridge, right? It's to dump a lot of data on people. Like, what does this mean, right? You got to walk them through your thinking. What's the beginning? The problem. What's the middle? What you discovered. What's the end? What it means. The bridge. You're going to start at one side of the story and go to the other side of the story through the bridge of what's the problem, what you discovered, what's the end, what it means, and how are you going to move forward? What's that next step? And so that you bring people along purposefully, not telling them all drama, telling the things that are meaningful to the conversation so they can understand how you got to where you got to and what you learned and how you move forward, right? So the next time you present, if you're worried about someone's going to say, just get to the point, resist the urge to lead with a conclusion without context, because the context is what gives you the impact. Now, you're going to ask these questions. What does my audience need to hear first? What do they need to know first? What's going to make my point land harder? 12% growth. It's going to make it land harder if they know that we were facing a 15% downturn or that we were expecting 24% growth and the market cratered because of tariffs or whatever the heck it is, and which adjusted our outlook to 0, but we were able to do 12. What do they need to know to make your point land harder? And what's the clearest path from confusion to conviction, right? So that people understand what you're doing and they have confidence in what you're going to do next. So just get to the point is lazy advice for lazy listeners. Your job isn't to be faster. It's to be better and to be fully understood. And when you can do that, you're communicating with clarity, you're demonstrating your mastery of a topic, you're projecting confidence, and you're creating confidence from other people in you. All right, that's all I got for today. Bye, everybody. Until next time, I'm Lee Caraher, and this is Everything Speaks.